Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions. Hello, welcome back to Otherworld Connections. And I realized that when I take my dog for a walk, well, I wear a hat. And I forgot my hat yesterday when I took my dog for a walk. And he was acting weird and he was behaving anxiously. And I realized, hey, I forgot my hat. Went back and got my hat. And then he got all excited because then he understood we're just going for his favorite walk. And when I bought that hat thinking, this is my dog walking hat with Ernie. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because it's very early in the morning for me. And I'm still only a few sips into my coffee. And on today's show, we're going to talk about finding your vocation. The thing you're supposed to do. The thing you were born to do. We're going to talk about unconscious cerebration. And I'm not saying that in a Chinese English accent. I'm saying cerebration as in mind working with an old book. Well, we look at an old book and we look at what the Theosophical Society has to say about that. All right, so finding your vocation is one of the gateways to connecting with that which we can't see. And we are going to look at trees. So you know what, funnily enough, to flip the switch, we're going to start off with tapping the life force of a tree. Stick around. Right, we're going to read from Mysteries of the Unknown book series, Earth Energies, Tapping the Life Force of a Tree. According to the Chinese traditions that gave rise to such practices as feng shui and acupuncture, an invisible life force called qi courses through everything in the universe. Trees, in particular, are regarded as wellsprings of the vital energy, drawing it out of the earth with their roots and setting it free through their leaves. In the human body, qi is thought to follow a circular path. It starts in the lower abdominal region, passes under the tailbone and up the spine to the head, before returning to the abdomen. A free flow of qi is considered essential to spiritual, mental, and physical well-being. Another Chinese belief was that any living thing could respond to the qi in any other. Acting on this assumption, practitioners of the meditative art called Qigong developed an exercise for harnessing a tree's upward flow of qi to encourage the circulation energy within the body. Before beginning such an exercise, the meditator takes pains to find a suitable tree for inspiration. Evergreens are considered the best because they are not affected by seasonal changes. Maples, on the other hand, are generally avoided. Tradition has deemed them unfriendly. Whatever the tree's variety, it shouldn't be neither too large nor too small, so that the reservoir of available energy is neither overpowering nor overly meager. The trunk should be straight and smooth, and perhaps most important, The meditator must have a special feeling for the tree. Once a suitable tree has been found, the meditator assumes a position, either sitting or standing, with his or her back up against the tree trunk, then begins a process of concentration. On pulling the chi up the spine to the head, while trying to detect an upsurge of power in the tree. A typical session lasts just 10 minutes, and when it is complete, the Qigong practitioner takes care to guide the Qi back to the abdomen. Excess Qi in other parts of the body is believed to be potentially harmful. Rubbing the belly is the usual technique for easing the Qi back. Okay, so the trees want to have a say in what you do. They want to help you. We will focus more on trees because that seems to be a popular topic. I get the most engagement and views when I talk about trees. So when I talk about trees, I get about 3 views and 1 comment. And when I don't, I get about 1 view and no comments. And that 1 view is me checking that that the upload worked. I'm only half joking, but right. So getting yourself to balance, allowing the trees to help you get to balance. And if you're in balance, well, there's an implied flow that's happening. And when you're in the flow, well, you're connected to the all, and the all might have a thing or two to say. Or maybe your guardian angel can speak to you clearer, or the tree fairy can speak to you clearer, that kind of thing. Right. So, find your tree. Right, so continuing with gateways, finding your vocation. Let's look at Let Your Life Speak, listening for the voice of vocation by Parker J. Palmer. Let's get on to it. Speaking of darkness, darkness is not the whole of the story. Every pilgrimage has passages of loveliness and joy, but it is the part of the story most often left untold. When we finally escape the darkness and stumble into the light, it is tempting to tell others that our hope never flagged, to deny those long nights we spent cowering in fear. The experience of darkness has been essential to my coming into selfhood. And telling the truth about that fact helps me stay in the light. But I want to tell that truth for another reason as well. Many young people today, I've done this before, haven't I? Lost my place. Oh well. Many young people today journey in the dark as the young always have. And we elders do them a disservice when we withhold the shadowy parts of our lives. When I was young, there were very few elders willing to talk about the darkness. Most of them pretended that success was all they had ever known. As the darkness began to descend on me in my early 20s, I thought I had developed a unique and terminal case of failure. I did not realize that I had merely embarked on a journey toward joining the human race. The story of my journey is no more or less important than anyone else's. It is simply the best source of data I have on a subject where generalizations often fail, but truth may be found in the details. I want to rehearse a few details of my travels and travails, extracting some insights about vocation as I go. I do so partly as an offering of honesty to the young, and partly as a reminder to anyone who needs it that the nuances of personal experience contain much guidance toward selfhood and vocation. My journey into darkness began in sunlit places. I grew up in a Chicago suburb and went to Carleton College in Minnesota. A splendid place where I found new faces to wear. Faces more like my own than the ones I donned in high school, but still the faces of other people. Wearing one of them, I went from college neither to the Navy nor to Madison Avenue, but to Union Theological Seminary in New York City. As certain that the ministry was now my calling as I had been a few years earlier about advertising and aviation. So it came as a great shock when, at the end of my first year, God spoke to me in the form of mediocre grades and massive misery, and informed me that under no conditions was I to become an ordained leader in his or her church. Always responsive to authority, as one was if raised in the 50s, I left Union and went west, to the University of California at Berkeley. There I spent much of the 60s working on a PhD in sociology and learning to be not quite so responsive to authority. Oh, I'm just finishing that coffee here, sorry. Very unprofessional, but I needed that. Berkeley in the 60s was, of course, an astounding mix of shadow and light. But contrary to the current myth, many of us were less seduced by the shadow than drawn by the light. Coming away from that time and place with a lifelong sense of hope, a feeling for community, a passion for social change. Though I taught for 2 years in the middle of graduate school, discovering that I loved teaching and was good at it, my Berkeley experience left me convinced that a university career would be a cop-out. I felt called instead to work on the urban crisis. So when I left Berkeley in the late 60s, a friend kept asking me, "Why do you want to go back to America?" I also left academic life. Indeed, I left on a white horse, some might say a high horse, full of righteous indignation about the academy's corruption, holding aloft the flaming sword of truth. I moved to Washington, D.C., where I became not a professor, but a community organizer. What I learned about the world from that work was the subject of an earlier book. What I learned about vocation is how one's values can do battle with one's heart. I felt morally compelled to work on the urban crisis, but doing so went against a growing sense that teaching might be my vocation. My heart wanted to keep teaching, but my ethics, laced liberally with ego, told me I was supposed to save the city. How could I reconcile the contradiction between the two? After 2 years of community organizing, with all its financial uncertainties, Georgetown University offered me a faculty post, one that did not require me to get off my white horse altogether. "We don't want you to be on campus all week long," said the dean. "We want you to get our students involved in the community. Here's a tenure track position involving a minimum of classes and no requirement to serve on committees. Keep working in the community and take our students out there with you." The part about no committees seemed like a gift from God, so I accepted Georgetown's offer and began involving undergraduates in community organizing. But I soon found an even bigger gift hidden in this arrangement. By looking anew at my community work through the lens of education, I saw that as an organizer, I had never stopped being a teacher. I was simply teaching in a classroom without walls. In fact, I could have done no other teaching. I was coming to understand is my native way of being in the world. Make me a cleric or a CEO, a poet, or a politico. And teaching is what I will do. Teaching is at the heart of my vocation and will manifest itself in any role I play. Georgetown's invitation allowed me to take my first step toward embracing this truth, toward a lifelong exploration of education unplugged. But even this way of reframing my work could not alter the fact that there was a fundamental misfit between the rough and tumble of organizing and my own overly sensitive nature. After 5 years of conflict and competition, I burned out. I was too thin-skinned to make a good community organizer. My vocational reach had exceeded my grasp. I had been driven more by the oughts of the urban crisis than by a sense of true self. Lacking insight into my own limits and potentials, I had allowed ego and ethics to lead me into a situation that my soul could not abide. I was disappointed in myself for not being tough enough to take the flak, disappointed and ashamed, but as pilgrims must discover if they are to complete their quest, we are led to truth by our weaknesses as well as our strengths. I needed to leave community organizing for a reason I might never have acknowledged had I not been thin-skinned and burned out. As an organizer, I was trying to take people to a place where I had never been myself, a place called community. If I wanted to do community-related work with integrity, I needed a deeper immersion in community than I had experienced to that point. I am white, middle class, and male, not exactly a leading candidate for a communal life. People like me are raised to live autonomously, not interdependently. I had been trained to compete and win, and I had developed a taste for the prizes. But something in me yearned to experience communion, not competition, and that something might never have made itself known had burnout not forced me to seek another way. So I took a year-long sabbatical from my work in Washington and went to a place called Pendle Hill, outside of Philadelphia. Founded in 1930, Pendle Hill is a Quaker living and learning community of some 70 people, whose mission is to offer education about the inner journey, nonviolent social change, and the connection between the two. It is a real-time experiment in Quaker faith and practice where residents move through a daily round of communal life, worshipping in silence each morning, sharing 3 meals a day, engaging in study, physical work, decision-making, and social outreach. It is a commune, an ashram, a monastery, a zendo, a kibbutz. Whatever one calls it, Pendle Hill was a life unlike anything I had ever known. Moving there was like moving to Mars, utterly alien but profoundly compelling. I thought I would stay for just a year and then go back to Washington and resume my work. But before my sabbatical ended, I was invited to become Pendle Hill's Dean of Studies. I stayed on for another decade, living in community and continuing my experiment with alternative models of education. It was a transformative passage for me personally, professionally, and spiritually. In retrospect, I know how impoverished I would have been without it. But early on in that passage, I began to have deep and painful doubts about the trajectory of my vocation. Though I felt called to stay at Pendle Hill, I also feared I had stepped off the edge of the known world and was at risk of disappearing professionally. From high school on, I had been surrounded by expectations that I would ascend to some sort of major leadership. When I was 29, the president of a prestigious college visited me in Berkeley to recruit me for his board of trustees. He was doing it, he joked, because no one on that board was under 60, let alone 30. Worse still, none of them had a beard, which I could supply as part of the Berkeley uniform. Then he added, "In fact, I'm doing this because someday you'll be a college president. Of that I'm sure, and serving as a trustee is an important part of your apprenticeship." I accepted his invitation because I felt certain he was right. So 6 years later, what was I doing at Pendle Hill? A commune, known to few, run by an offbeat religious community that most people can identify only by their oatmeal, which, I hasten to add, is not really made by Quakers. I'll tell you what I was doing. I was in the craft shop making mugs that weighed more and looked worse than the clay ashtrays I made in grade school. And I was sending those monstrosities home as gifts to my family. My father, rest his soul, was in the fine chinaware business, and I was sending him mugs so heavy you could fill them with coffee and not feel any difference in weight. Family and friends were asking me, and I was asking myself, why did you get a PhD if this was what you were going to do? Aren't you squandering your opportunities and gifts? Under that sort of scrutiny, my vocational decision felt wasteful and ridiculous. What's more, it was terrifying to an ego like mine that had no desire to disappear and every desire to succeed and become well known. Did I want to go to Pendle Hill, to be at Pendle Hill, to stay at Pendle Hill? I cannot say that I did, but I can say with certainty that Pendle Hill was something that I couldn't not do. Vocation at its deepest level is not, oh boy, do I want to go to this strange place where I have to learn a new way to live and where no one, including me, understands what I'm doing. Vocation at its deepest level is, this is something I can't not do for reasons I'm unable to explain to anyone else and don't fully understand myself, but that are nonetheless compelling. And that's where I want to leave that. So I hope that makes sense why I actually read that out. So what do you think? Is that self-defeating personality disorder? Is that apologizing for a life of failure? Well, I haven't actually finished reading the whole book, so... But you get the point, right? So, one thing I want to point out in Parker J. Palmer's writing is that he was obviously self-reflective and, following a kind of priest, following the life of the priest, he probably had a fair bit of time to reflect as he went. So I think self-reflection has something to do there, and he was asking questions and not really knowing the answer and just feeling like this is what he should be doing. And when you feel like this is what you should be doing and you're asking questions, if you feel like you're kind of on a way but you're not sure if it's right or not, you're asking questions of yourself and you're being criticized by people, you're probably on the right path. That's what I think. I had something else to say about that, but I forgot. So let's move to unconscious cerebration, which ties in to the asking questions. Okay, back to the book by Sarah Elizabeth Titcomb from 1885, Mind Cure on a Material Basis. I'm going to read a little bit here. Sir William Hamilton, who alone of British psychologists has fully developed the theory of latent states of mental activity or mental latency, distinguishes 3 degrees of the condition. The first is to be seen in acquired knowledge. I know a science or language, he says, not merely when I make temporary use of it, but inasmuch as I can apply it when and how I will. Thus, the infinitely greater part of our spiritual treasures lies always beyond the sphere of consciousness, hid in the obscure recesses of the mind. The second condition of latency exists, Sir William Hamilton states, when the mind contains certain systems of knowledge or certain habits of action, which it is wholly unconscious of possessing in its ordinary state, but which are revealed to consciousness in certain extraordinary exaltation of its powers. The evidence on this point shows that the mind frequently contains whole systems of knowledge, which, although in our normal state they have faded into absolute oblivion, may, in certain abnormal states, as madness, febrile delirium, somnambulism, catalepsy, etc., flash out into luminous consciousness, and even throw into the shade of unconsciousness those other systems by which they had for a long period been eclipsed and even extinguished. For example, there are cases in which the extinct memory of whole languages was suddenly restored, and what is even more remarkable, in which the faculty was exhibited of accurately repeating, in known or unknown tongues, passages which were never within the grasp of conscious memory in the normal state. The third class of latent modifications are included in the question stated by Sir William Hamilton: whether in the ordinary processes of mental life there are mental modifications, i.e., mental activities and passivities of which we are unconscious, but which manifest their existence by effects of which we are conscious. Sir William's answer is, I am not only strongly inclined to the affirmative, nay, I do not hesitate to maintain that what we are conscious of is constructed out of what we are not conscious of, that our whole knowledge, in fact, is made up of the unknown and incognizable. Sergeant Cox observes, the mental condition to which the appropriate name of unconscious cerebration has been given may be thus described. In certain conditions, some of the mental faculties work without consciousness by ourselves of their action. The brain or some portion of it thinks, feels, has ideas, goes through complicated and elaborate courses of thought, and even prompts to action without consciousness of the operation of the individual, who at the same moment is consciously employed in some other mental work. Sometimes there is a self-consciousness of the results of such action. Sometimes also the results are cognizable by others, although quite unrecognized by the actor. Dr. Carpenter shows that much of our highest mental activity is to be regarded as the expression of the automatic action of the cerebrum, and that it may act upon impressions transmitted to it, and may elaborate results such as we might have obtained by the purposive direction of our minds to the subject, without any consciousness on our parts. Looking, he adds, at all those automatic operations by which results are evolved without any intentional direction of the mind to them, in the light of reflex actions of the cerebrum, there is no more difficulty in comprehending that such reflex actions may proceed without our knowledge, so as to evolve intellectual products, when their results are transmitted to the sensorium, and are thus impressed on our consciousness. Then there is an understanding that impressions may evolve muscular movements through the reflex power of the spinal cord without the necessary intervention of sensation. Cerebral changes may take place unconsciously if the sensorium be either in a state of absolute torpor or for a time non-receptive as regards to those changes, its activity being exerted in some other direction, or to express the same fact psychologically, that mental changes of whose results we subsequently become convinced may go on below the plane of consciousness, either during profound sleep or while the attention is wholly engrossed by some entirely different train of thought. The more we examine into what may be termed the mechanism of thought, the more clear it does become that not only an automatic but an unconscious action enters largely into all its processes. There is considered considerable ground to believe that the best judgments are often mentally delivered in difficult cases, by the unconscious resolution of the difficulties in the way of arriving at a conclusion, when the question, after being well considered in the first place, is left to settle itself. Okay, we got to that bit. Okay. It has, on several occasions, continues Dr. Carpenter, quoting from a lecture delivered by himself, occurred to me to form a decision as to some important change, either in my own plans of life or in those of members of my family, in which were involved in a great many of what we are accustomed to call pros and cons. And I believe that in all such cases where we are not pressed for a decision, our best plan is to let the question settle itself by unconscious cerebration. Having first brought before our minds as fully as possible everything that can be fairly urged on both sides, Dr. Carpenter quotes the following account given by Oliver Wendell Holmes. I was told within a week, says Dr. Holmes, of a businessman in Boston who, having an important question under consideration, had given it up for the time as too much for him, but he was conscious of an action going on in his brain which was so unusual and painful as to excite his apprehensions that he was threatened with palsy or something of that sort. After some hours of this uneasiness, his perplexity was all at once cleared up by the natural solution of his doubts coming to him, worked out, as he believed, in that obscure and troubled interval. Dr. Holmes observes, I question whether persons who think most, that is, have most conscious thought pass through their minds, necessarily do most mental work. The tree you are sticking in will be growing while you are sleeping. So with every new idea that is planted in a real thinker's mind, it will be growing when he is least conscious of it. An idea in the brain is not a legend carved on a marble slab. It is an impression made on a living tissue, which is the seat of active nutritive properties. Shall the initials I carved in bark increase from year to year with the tree? And shall not my recorded thought develop into new forms and relations with my growing brain? In this connection, Sir Benjamin Brodie remarks, it seems to me on some occasions as if there were, in the mind, a principle of order which operates without our being at the time conscious of it. It has often happened to me to have been occupied by a particular subject of inquiry, to have accumulated a store of facts connected with it, but to have been able to proceed no further. Then, after an interval of time, without any addition to my stock of knowledge, I have found the obscurity and confusion in which the subject was originally enveloped to have cleared away. The facts have seemed all to settle themselves in their right places, and their mental relations to have become apparent, although I have not been sensible of having made any distinct effort for that purpose. In speaking of the fact that it is an everyday occurrence to most of us to forget a particular word or line of poetry and to remember it some minutes or hours later, Francis Power Cobb remarks, we try, perhaps anxiously at first, to recover it, well aware that it lies somewhere hidden in our memory, but unable to seize it. Deliberately turn away, not intending finally to abandon the pursuit, but precisely as if we were possessed of an obedient secretary or librarian whom we could order to hunt up a missing document or turn out a word in a dictionary. While we amused ourselves with something else, the more this very common phenomenon is studied, the more I think the observer of his own mental processes will be obliged to concede. The result is made absolutely without him. He has neither pain nor pleasure, nor sense of labour in the task, any more than if it were performed by another person. And his conscious self is all the time suffering, enjoying, or labouring a totally different ground. The following passage from an early work of Abraham Tucker's presents the most familiar illustration of the process of unconscious cerebration. But, though the mind, by her notice, begins the formation of a train of ideas, There is something in our internal mechanism that strengthens and completes the concatenation. It has been generally remarked by schoolboys that after having laboured the whole evening before a repetition to get their lesson by heart, but to very little purpose, when they rise in the morning they shall have it current at their tongue's end without any further trouble. Nor is it unusual with persons of riper years, when being asked for a determination which they cannot form without a number of things to be previously considered, to desire time to sleep upon it, because with all their care to digest their materials they cannot do it completely. But after a night's rest, or some recreation, or the mind being turned for a while into a different course of thinking, she finds they have ranged themselves anew during her absence, and in such a manner as exhibit almost at one view all their mutual relations, dependencies, and consequences, which shows that our organs do not stand idle the moment we cease to employ them, but continue the motions we put them into after they have gone out of sight, thereby working themselves to a glibness and smoothness, and falling into a more regular and orderly posture than we could have placed them with all our skill and industry. At one of the lectures on the mind cure which the writer attended, a certain theological idea was propounded by the lecturer, which the writer felt sure might be refuted by some fact in nature. Upon her return from the lecture, she meditated upon the subject until midnight, but fell asleep without having arrived at the solution of the problem. On awakening in the morning, she found the solution of the problem in her mind. She was aware of the fact before she was fully conscious of being awake. On another occasion, the writer felt great dissatisfaction in regard to a certain matter, and turned the subject over in her mind many times, but without being able to come to a satisfactory conclusion regarding it, so decided to leave the matter as it was. At the same time, there was a point of minor importance that she had been unable to settle, and having had the experience in having a point settled, she decided to leave the point to be settled in the same manner. And Okay, well, it does just go on and on and on, but let's leave it at, she was aware of the fact before she was fully conscious of being awake. If I read on, it just starts going deeper down that rabbit hole, and that's not the point. The point is what we got to. Sleeping on things. Okay. Asking the question, not knowing the answer to something, but ruminating on it, sleeping on it, and then coming up with the solution, or your brain, your unconscious cerebration, finding the answer for you. All right, and then let's tag on to that with a little bit more reading. We are getting to solutions, you see, all this blah, blah, blah. And that was an old book with some, pretty heavy, oh my gosh, yeah, some pretty heavy rhetoric there. So, well, at least for me anyway. Let's look at Theosophy, the Wisdom, Religion, by the editorial board of Theosophy Trust, from 2015. An excerpt from the chapter of The Hermetic Method. Here we go. What is constant in one long period of time will change itself over a longer period of time. This becomes a problem of periods of manifestation. This, then, is why all questions about human destiny and choice merely show that in the end we have to learn the dialectic, the method of analogy and correspondence. However much the term dialectic, like every sacred word, is tortured and abused, it remains the sovereign method of maintaining a mobile relationship in reference to degrees of reality, knowledge, and truth. Students of Theosophy are helped to do this, and are thus prepared for true meditation by study of the secret doctrine. This study is literally what it says, a study of the secret doctrine, not merely of a book. The secret doctrine is in nature, and it is in every one of us. Concerning the book, The Secret Doctrine, unlike almost any other book of the modern age, one could assume that every word has been chosen with great care. It is also wise to assume that there are a lot of blinds and also a lot of aids. It is meant to speak authentically to the widest possible audience, but in that code language where each one determines what he can receive. In Shelley's words, it talks according to the wit of its companions, and no more is heard than has been felt before. It uses many conceptual languages and speaks in terms of many myths. No one finds all of these immediately meaningful. There is also a catechism and a hidden mathematical logic to the book. But grasping them involves the reflection of buddhi or intuition in manas, the focus of ideation. What this means for us, first of all, is not to read the book except when in a state of calm. Secondly, not to read the book with any anxiety. Put as a paradox, we give it its importance by treating it casually. We can become familiar and friendly with the book and put ourselves in the position of the writer in trying to see why there is a certain framework. We can read the contents of both volumes and try to see not the details of the framework, but the method which is in the contents. It is the Hermetic method of coming from above below, the method of analogy and correspondence, of the same and the other. It is not taught in the modern age in schools, in universities, or in our society. It includes what we call deductive reasoning and has a place for experience, but excludes induction. It really goes beyond all such divisions. It is what used to be called in the East the archetypal dialectic, Buddha Yoga, and was also taught by Pythagoras and Plato. The secret doctrine, then, involves planes of consciousness, degrees of knowledge, stairways of reality, a series of superimpositions of pictures, like pictures created with certain photographic techniques where different forms and shapes assumed by the same object are simultaneously represented. One might say of the book, and this is a paradox, that, like everything cosmic, the more we study it, the more we learn how to study it. The more we read it, but with love, the more that is worthwhile will emerge. Particularly to be enjoyed are those statements in the book which are combinations of sounds that are mathematically precise. One day there will be men who will pronounce the stanzas and perform magic, but that will be a very different kind of humanity. Today there are men who can enter into the deeper realm of the book, even though they don't know where they are in terms of ordinary conceptions of growth and progress. In other words, the secret doctrine is a book to take up again and again. We should read it up to that point where the mind is calm and not exhausted. Put it away and preferably sleep after one has read it. There we go. Let things happen. Whichever method one chooses, one should not cling to it, because another method may be found that will seem more appropriate later on. This is why a simple chronological way of reading the book may not be suitable. On the other hand, to awe-inspired a reception of the stanzas may not be appropriate either. Certainly the lower manas cannot understand the book, and trying to fit it together with other things for the sake of fitting is a waste of time. A broad and simple statement of how to approach the book is to approach the mind of the author and to see that mind in relation to Mahat, the collective mind of nature, and to see that in oneself. Put in concrete terms, a point comes in any important book where you want to ask, not, do I understand? Which is to start off too apologetically, But if I were this man, why would I want to be saying this? This may sound presumptuous, but it is a legitimate way of becoming one with the author. So one says, if what is said in the preface is true, and if these things happened to anyone in the particular kind of instruction to which H.P. Blavatsky refers in the poem and the preface, then what would be the point of doing this and that? This is a means to unite or yoke through yoga one's mind with the mind of the author. The most important clue which gives away the code language of the secret doctrine is in the very first words. The book begins by saying, the author, the writer, rather. Right away, the book tells you that its author is not any one person. It is a very enigmatic book. All right, we made it. A lot of reading, but do you see the thread there? Okay. So there's a reflective, there's asking questions. Well, that's the thread throughout the whole thing. Ruminating on important things such as your life path and the tips on reading the secret doctrine can be applied to all kinds of things based on Mind Cure on the Material Basis book that we had a look at. So that's scientifically proven. That is a strategy. So in a calm state, before bed and in the morning, reading how to. So things you can try before sleep, you could read a relevant self-help book. And if you're reading a relevant self-help book where you've already been reflecting like the priest did like Parker J. Palmer did, in Letting Your Life Speak, listening to the voice of vocation, he did a lot of that. So you could ask how you're going to resolve a particular issue. So ruminating on some struggles that you're having, you can ask that before sleep because it's probably on your mind anyway, right? That's a real powerful one. Give that one a try. You can contemplate what the biggest problem you are facing or the most important issue right now. If you're unsure, just ask yourself. So yeah, if you are in that state that Palmer J. Parker talks about, where you kind of got this feeling that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, but you're unsure, well, you can ask questions about that. Maybe you'll get an answer the next day. Well, you probably will, because you're focusing on the right thing, you're asking the right questions. And you could also try to picture your successful outcome that's based on other episodes that we've covered here on Otherworld Connections for your one goal or otherwise. And here's the other thing, which we talked about, the can of Pepsi meditation. If you struggle to picture your outcome or your success or your goal, then the question, then you go back a step and you ask, why is that? And that's what you're ruminating on. How can I picture that? How can I do this? How can I do that? And that's exactly how I got the Pepsi idea. Doing that. Like, how am I going to start? How am I going to picture my goals? I can't, how am I going to create goals? How am I going to think? And then that's how I got that's actually how I got the Pepsi, imagine yourself enjoying a Pepsi visualization exercise. That's where I got that from. You can ask what's preventing me from picturing it. You can ask what the solution is. So there are a lot of questions you can ask based on where you are. And if you are asking all these kind of questions, well, you're in the vocation space. You're paying attention to it. And this corresponds to the tree. You can ask the tree. You can connect with the tree. The trees want to help you with that. The trees want to align things. So the tree that you choose is going to help you align your mind to your goals and what you want to do. We talked about the hollow tree. The hollow tree wants to absorb your issues and your problems like a big emotional psychic sponge. You can offload onto the hollow tree? What about the living tree that has the straight and smooth trunk? Well, it wants to help you reach the heights that it reaches, right? So that's where the trees come in, from all the way back to the beginning of the show, tapping the life force of the tree. That corresponds to tapping the life force of the secret doctrine and the theosophy thing. Anyway, I'm trying to paint that thread anyway in this show, that there are different ways to get answers through unconscious cerebration, as scientifically proven in that book from 1885. And the occult, the mystery schools, they apply this technique of ruminating before sleep. And in theosophy, they recommend to do it with the secret doctrine. And in the secret doctrine, in that bit we read, let's just quickly go over. Approach the mind of the author and to see that mind in relation to Mahat, the collective mind of nature. So you can ask of the author, approaching the mind of the author, or you can go into actual nature and approach the mind of the tree. That's why we brought up the tree, because it's all about solutions and different solutions for the kind of person that you are. All right, 2 minutes left, so let's wrap this up. When we are going through life, the process in the darkness is possibly where we are supposed to be going. So I say, try to pay no mind to the opinions and pressures of others, and do the things that you feel like maybe you are supposed to do, and stick with it, as intimated by Parker J. Palmer in Let Your Life Speak, listening for the voice of vocation. And furthermore, if you've got a lot of pushback from people, then you probably are doing the right thing, because you are showing fortitude in what you're doing, and that's coming from a place in your heart that is probably telling you this is where you're supposed to be going. And struggling before sleep, contemplation before sleep, ruminating, looking for answers before sleep is a hermetic practice, in my words. Maybe we don't need Blavatsky's secret doctrine on our bedside table, but nevertheless, the only way to find out if we can influence our unconscious cerebration is by discovery. So read books of knowledge that you want to know, or how-to, self-help, da-da-da-da-da. Read them before bed, ruminate, see what happens. Ask those questions before bed. Get off your phone. Easier said than done, but try it. And there is a correspondence to trees in this whole process. We covered one way through Qigong practice that we can choose and connect with a tree through meditation, finding solutions and achieving our goals. After all, trees have been doing what they do and know what they are doing and have been for a very long time. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. And we will see you at the next one. I love you guys.